Abandoned dog. Broken scientist. One auction changed everything. Watch how two wounded souls find healing and save a town in the process. Comment where you're watching from and subscribe now. The auction hall at Bayview Animal Rescue Center fell silent as the Belgian Malinois limped onto the center stage. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, his once proud frame told a story of neglect. Dull tawny fur hung loosely over visible ribs, and a pronounced limp marred his gait. His amber eyes, though clouded with wariness, still held a spark of the intelligence that had once made him exceptional. Frank Miller, the auctioneer, tugged uncomfortably at his collar. He'd been doing this job for 15 years, but days like this still got to him. Clearing his throat, he began with forced cheerfulness. Up next, we have Kaiser, an 8-year-old retired K-9 unit. Former narcotics detection specialist with the Boston PD. Has an injury to his left hind leg that didn't heal properly. Starting bids at $50. Do I hear 50? The room of 30-some people shifted awkwardly in their metal folding chairs. Eyes darted away from the stage. A few whispers rippled through the crowd. He was one of their best, Frank added desperately. 3 commendations for service. In the front row, Eleanor Winters, a silver-haired volunteer who'd been with the center since its founding, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. She'd spent the last week trying to socialize Kaiser, but the dog remained distant, as if he'd accepted his fate. Come on, folks, Frank pleaded. He's got plenty of good years left. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Kaiser lowered his head, as if sensing the rejection. Just as Frank reached for his gavel, a movement came from the back of the room. A man rose slowly to his feet. Tall and lean with silver hair and thick-rimmed glasses, he wore a weather-beaten jacket patched at the elbows. His face, deeply lined around the eyes and mouth, suggested he was in his early 60s. 50, he said quietly, raising his hand. Kaiser's ears perked up, his head swiveling toward the voice. For a brief moment, dog and man locked eyes across the room. I have 50, Frank announced with palpable relief. Do I hear 60? When no other bids came, Frank brought down his gavel. Sold to the gentleman in the back for $50. Eleanor hurried over to the man as the crowd began to disperse. Dr. Howard? I didn't expect to see you here today. Dr. Michael Howard, known simply as Doc, around the coastal Massachusetts town of Bayview, nodded slightly. Neither did I, to be honest. You know about his condition? Eleanor asked hesitantly. I read the listing, Doc replied, his eyes still on Kaiser. Military trained, then police. Career-ending injury. No retirement benefits for 4-legged officers, I suppose. Eleanor sighed. The department couldn't afford his medical care after budget cuts. It's shameful how they discard them when they can't serve anymore. As they spoke, Kaiser continued watching Doc with an intensity that surprised them both. Well, Eleanor said with a small smile, I think he's chosen you as much as you've chosen him. Doc Howard didn't respond. No one in the room could have guessed how this seemingly ordinary meeting would transform both their lives in the months to come. The coastal town of Bayview had a way of collecting interesting characters, wealthy summer tourists, fishermen with stories tall as waves, and a handful of year-rounders who preferred the off-season solitude. Among them, Dr. Michael Howard remained an enigma. Since arriving 5 years ago, locals knew little about him beyond his preference for privacy and his unusual house perched on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic. The drive home from the shelter took 20 minutes along winding coastal roads. Doc glanced occasionally at his new companion in the passenger seat. Kaiser sat rigidly, eyes fixed forward, his breathing controlled as if still on duty. We're almost there, Doc said softly. The dog's ear twitched, acknowledging the sound without breaking his vigilant posture. The house came into view, a weathered Cape Cod with cedar shingles turned silver from salt air. Solar panels dotted the south-facing roof, and scientific equipment cluttered the wraparound porch, weather vanes, barometers, and instruments Doc had designed himself. Home, Doc announced, parking his faded blue Volvo. Kaiser remained still until Doc opened the passenger door. Even then, the dog descended gingerly, favoring his injured leg. Inside, the house contradicted its traditional exterior. One wall displayed 6 computer monitors tracking weather patterns. Bookshelves overflowed with meteorological journals. The living room had been converted into a lab with a large table covered in half-assembled equipment. I should warn you, I'm not much for company, Doc explained, watching Kaiser survey the room. That's why I live out here. Catherine Chun, Doc's research assistant and the only person who regularly visited, had left a note on the counter, called from MIT. They're interested in the storm prediction algorithm. Also, your prescription refill is in the fridge. Doc sighed, crumpling the note. Universities want the work, but not the man behind it, he muttered. Kaiser made a slow circuit of the room, sniffing cautiously. He stopped at a framed photo, Doc younger, in a pressed uniform beside sophisticated radar equipment, receiving an award. That was another life, Doc said. Before I made the mistake that ended my career. Kaiser tilted his head, seeming to assess the man before him. You're probably wondering about food, Doc said, moving toward the kitchen. I'm afraid I didn't plan this. He rummaged through the refrigerator, finding leftover grilled salmon. This will have to do until tomorrow. Kaiser approached cautiously when Doc set down the plate. He ate with disciplined restraint, military manners evident in every movement. You're not what they said, Doc observed. They described you as difficult, withdrawn, but you're just careful. I understand that. After eating, Kaiser retreated to a corner with clear sightlines to all entrances, watching Doc work at his computers. Doc's fingers flew across keyboards as he tracked a developing weather system. For hours, he forgot about his new housemate, lost in algorithms and pressure systems. When he finally looked up, moonlight streamed through the windows, and Kaiser remained in the same vigilant position. You should sleep, Doc said, suddenly aware of the time. He showed Kaiser an old blanket in the corner of the living room. This is for you if you want it. Kaiser approached the blanket, sniffed it thoroughly, but didn't lie down. Your choice, Doc shrugged. I don't sleep much either. That night, Doc woke from a recurring nightmare. Sirens, flooding, faces of people he'd failed. He stumbled to the kitchen for water, finding Kaiser standing at the window, staring out at the ocean. What do you see out there? Doc asked, joining him. Kaiser's ears perked forward, his body tense. Doc checked his instruments. Barometric pressures dropping. Storm coming tomorrow. Kaiser turned his amber eyes to Doc, intelligent, assessing. I wonder what else you know, Doc whispered. That the rest of us have forgotten how to see. Morning broke with dark clouds gathering on the horizon. Doc sat at his workstation, monitoring the approaching storm system while sipping black coffee from a chipped NASA mug. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he hardly noticed. His attention shifted between the weather models and Kaiser, who stood motionless at the sliding glass door, watching the churning ocean below. Interesting, isn't it? Doc said, observing Kaiser's fixation. Low-pressure system moving faster than predicted. Kaiser's ears twitched, but he remained focused on the darkening sky. His posture had changed subtly, more alert, muscles tensed slightly beneath his thin frame. The phone rang, startling them both. Doc rarely received calls, and even more rarely answered them. Dr. Howard, he said gruffly. Doc, it's Eleanor from the shelter. Her voice sounded hesitant. I'm just checking in on Kaiser. How is he adjusting? Doc glanced at the dog. He's observant. Hasn't relaxed since he got here. That's to be expected, Eleanor said. His handler was killed in the line of duty 2 years ago. After that, he was reassigned 3 times before the injury. Trust won't come easily. The information hit Doc like a physical blow. His file didn't mention that. Police departments don't like to advertise their failures, Eleanor replied. Kaiser's handler was shot during a drug bust. Kaiser tried to protect him. That's how he got the first injury to his shoulder. The leg came later, during training with a new handler who didn't understand his trauma. Doc's gaze returned to Kaiser, seeing him with new eyes. Why didn't you tell me this before? Would it have changed your decision? Eleanor challenged gently. After a pause, Doc answered, No. That's why. Some things need to be discovered, not told. She paused. The storm looks bad. You two stay safe. After hanging up, Doc approached Kaiser slowly. So we're both damaged goods, huh? He said quietly. Kaiser finally turned from the window, regarding Doc with careful eyes. My mistake was bigger than yours, Doc continued, lowering himself to sit on the floor, bringing himself to Kaiser's level. I miscalculated a hurricane path. Told everyone it would turn east, out to sea. It didn't. 7 people died because they trusted my prediction. Kaiser took a step closer, his head tilted slightly. I resigned before they could fire me, Doc admitted. Couldn't face the families. Couldn't face myself in the mirror. So I came here to hide. just like you're hiding now behind those eyes. A low rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. Kaiser's ears flattened momentarily. Not a fan of storms? Doc asked. Ironic, considering your new roommate. The first raindrops began to hit the windows, fat and heavy. Wind whistled through the eaves of the old house. Doc stood up, moving to check his equipment. Barometric pressures dropping fast. Wind velocity increasing. This could get interesting. Kaiser followed, limping but determined, staying close to Doc as he moved around the house, securing loose equipment on the porch. When Doc struggled with a heavy weather station, Kaiser nudged his hand away, using his body to brace the metal stand while Doc tightened the bolts. Good boy, Doc said, surprised. You've done this kind of thing before, haven't you? As the storm intensified, the power flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Damn it, Doc muttered, reaching for the emergency lantern. Generator should kick in. Before he could finish, Kaiser began barking urgently, facing the back of the house. What is it? Doc asked, following Kaiser's gaze toward the tool shed where he kept years of handwritten research journals. Through the rain-streaked window, he could see part of the shed's roof beginning to collapse under the weight of accumulated water. Oh God, my research! Doc exclaimed, grabbing a raincoat and rushing toward the door. Kaiser was already there, pawing frantically at the handle. Together, they plunged into the howling storm, man and dog united by a common purpose for the first time. The storm unleashed its full fury as Doc and Kaiser battled their way across the yard. Rain lashed sideways, stinging Doc's face despite the protection of his raincoat. Wind gusts nearly knocked him off balance, but Kaiser pressed against his leg, steadying him. Stay close, Doc shouted over the howling wind, though the command was unnecessary. Kaiser moved as if tethered to him, compensating for his limp with sheer determination. They reached the shed just as another section of the roof began to sag dangerously. Water already poured through the initial breach, soaking the wooden shelves where Doc kept decades of handwritten journals, irreplaceable observations, and calculations from throughout his career. We need to get the blue storage bins first, Doc instructed, pointing to the waterproof containers on the upper shelves. Those contain my earliest work. Kaiser seemed to understand the urgency. He positioned himself under the worst of the leaks, as if trying to shield the papers with his own body while Doc frantically grabbed containers. Hand me that tarp. Doc called out instinctively, then caught himself. To his astonishment, Kaiser had already gripped the edge of a folded tarp with his teeth, pulling it toward Doc with surprising gentleness. You really do understand, don't you? Doc whispered, momentarily forgetting the chaos around them. A loud crack overhead broke the moment. Out. Now, Doc commanded, grabbing the last container. Kaiser needed no encouragement, limping quickly toward the door. They had barely cleared the threshold when the remaining roof support gave way, collapsing onto the workbench where Doc had been standing seconds before. Back inside the house, both man and dog stood dripping in the kitchen, breathing heavily. Doc set down the rescued journals with trembling hands and turned to Kaiser. You saved my life, he said simply, and years of my work. For the first time, Kaiser's rigid posture softened slightly. He allowed Doc to approach and gently examine his leg, which showed signs of renewed strain from their rescue mission. Let's get you dried off, Doc said, fetching a towel. As he carefully dried Kaiser's fur, he noticed old scars hidden beneath, evidence of past injuries beyond what the shelter had disclosed. You've seen combat, Doc murmured, fingers tracing a particularly severe scar along Kaiser's flank. So have I in my own way. Different battlefields, same scars. Thunder boomed directly overhead, causing Kaiser to flinch. Doc noticed the dog's eyes darting to the corners of the room, hyper-vigilant. PTSD, Doc diagnosed quietly. I know something about that too. He retrieved a blanket from the closet and spread it on the floor beside his own bed. Come on, he said, patting the blanket. Neither of us should be alone tonight. Kaiser hesitated, then approached cautiously. He circled 3 times before settling on the blanket, amber eyes still fixed watchfully on document. I was there when Hurricane Eliza hit in 2017, Doc said quietly, sitting on the edge of his bed. I told the mayor not to evacuate. Said my models showed it turning east. His voice broke. I can still hear the sirens. See the faces of the people who trusted me. Kaiser's ears perked up, listening. Who did you lose? Doc asked. Your handler? Eleanor told me what happened. At the mention, Kaiser whined softly. Officer David Miller, Doc continued, having read the name in Kaiser's file. Did you blame yourself, like I did, for not being able to save him? Kaiser lowered his head onto his paws, eyes still locked with Doc's. Maybe that's why we found each other, Doc mused. Two old warriors carrying too much weight. The storm raged on, but within the house, something shifted. When Doc eventually lay down to sleep, Kaiser remained vigilant beside him. Sometime in the darkest hour of the night, Doc awoke to find Kaiser had moved, his head now resting gently against Doc's arm, the first voluntary contact he had initiated. We'll be okay, Doc whispered, hesitantly placing his hand on Kaiser's head. This time, Kaiser didn't pull away. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind fallen branches and flooded streets. But inside the old house on the bluff, a different kind of storm had finally begun to clear. The days following the storm brought subtle changes to the routine at the house on the bluff. Doc woke earlier than usual, driven by a new sense of purpose. The morning after their shed rescue, he cleared a space in his cluttered living room and began assembling what looked like a physical therapy station for Kaiser. I've been researching canine rehabilitation techniques, Doc explained as Kaiser watched him skeptically from his corner. Your medical records show a torn cruciate ligament that never healed properly because treatment was discontinued when the department budget was cut. Kaiser's ears twitched at the serious tone in Doc's voice. I'm not a veterinarian, Doc admitted, adjusting a balance platform he'd constructed overnight, but I understand biomechanics. We're going to fix that leg, Kaiser. Together. Doc knelt beside the dog and gently ran his hands along Kaiser's injured limb. Kaiser tensed but allowed the examination. Trust has to go both ways, Doc said quietly. I haven't trusted anyone in years. Not even myself. Maybe we can relearn together. Doc's weathered hands moved with surprising tenderness, massaging the atrophied muscles. Let's start small. 10 minutes of targeted exercise, 3 times daily. Kaiser's first attempts on the balance board were tentative. He would place his injured leg down, then quickly lift it when pain flared. Doc remained patient, offering encouragement in a low, steady voice that Kaiser seemed to respond to. Good boy. That's it. Just a few seconds longer this time. By afternoon, Eleanor from the shelter arrived with supplies. She stood in the doorway, watching Doc guide Kaiser through a gentle stretching routine. Well, I'll be damned, she said, setting down a bag of premium dog food and medications. I've never seen him let anyone touch him like that. Doc looked up, slightly embarrassed. We had an understanding last night. So I heard. The storm was brutal. Half the town still without power. She approached slowly, careful not to disrupt the fragile peace between man and dog. The therapy was your idea? Doc nodded. I designed rehabilitation equipment for astronauts after long-duration spaceflight. The principles aren't so different. Muscles weakened by disuse, compensatory movements that need correction. Eleanor smiled. You're full of surprises, Dr. Howard. Most people around here think you're just some eccentric recluse who watches clouds. That's not inaccurate, Doc admitted with a rare smile. But I've been many things. Eleanor knelt to Kaiser's level, maintaining a respectful distance. And how are you doing, handsome? Is the good doctor treating you well? Kaiser glanced between Eleanor and Doc, then deliberately moved closer to Doc's side. I think that answers your question, Doc said quietly. Eleanor's eyes misted slightly. His handler, David Miller, was a good man. They worked together for 4 years. After David died, Kaiser shut down completely. Wouldn't work with anyone else. They labeled him unfit for service after he bit his new handler. He was grieving, Doc said defensively, and probably trying to protect his territory, his memories of David. Exactly. But the department doesn't have therapists for K9s with broken hearts. Eleanor stood up. They just discard them. After Eleanor left, Doc took Kaiser for their first walk together along the private beach below the house. Kaiser moved stiffly at first, but the sand provided natural resistance training for his weak leg. Eleanor says you were the best narcotics detection dog they'd ever had, Doc said as they walked. 3 major busts in your first year alone. Kaiser limped alongside, occasionally stopping to investigate interesting scents. I was the best in my field once too, Doc continued. They called me the Storm Whisperer. Ridiculous name. Then one mistake wiped it all away. They stopped at a large piece of driftwood where Doc sat down to rest. Kaiser remained standing, scanning the horizon with professional vigilance. "You can sit, you know," Doc said gently. "You're retired now. We both are." As if understanding, Kaiser slowly lowered himself beside Doc, his amber eyes still alert but somehow softer. "I've been thinking," Doc said, watching the waves. "Maybe we both need new missions. Something to live for beyond our mistakes." Kaiser's head tilted inquisitively. "First mission, get you walking properly again," Doc declared. "Second mission." He paused, looking out at the vast ocean. "I'm still working on that one. But for the first time in years, I'm actually thinking about tomorrow." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the beach, Doc noticed Kaiser was standing differently, weight cautiously distributed to include his injured leg rather than avoiding it entirely. "Small steps," Doc murmured, as they turned back toward home. That's how all journeys begin. The morning of July 4th dawned clear and bright over Bayview. American flags fluttered from nearly every porch in town, and the scent of barbecues being prepared wafted through the salt-tinged air. 6 weeks had passed since Kaiser had joined Doc's solitary life, and the changes were remarkable in both of them. Doc stood on his porch, coffee in hand, watching Kaiser navigate the series of balance exercises he'd constructed across the yard. The dog moved with increasing confidence, his once pronounced limp now barely perceptible. Kaiser finished the course and looked to Doc for approval. "Perfect," Doc called, unable to suppress a smile. "Better than yesterday." Kaiser trotted over, his amber eyes bright with what Doc had come to recognize as pride. The hollow-ribbed, dull-coated animal from the auction was gone. In his place stood a dignified, increasingly muscular Belgian Malinois with a growing sense of purpose. "Big day today," Doc informed him, scratching behind Kaiser's ears, a liberty that would have been unthinkable 6 weeks ago. "The town's Independence Day celebration. I usually skip it, but—" Doc hesitated, not quite ready to admit he was considering breaking his years-long tradition of isolation. As if sensing his reluctance, Kaiser nudged Doc's hand with his nose. "You want to go?" Doc asked, surprised. "It'll be crowded. Noisy. Fireworks." Kaiser's tail wagged slightly, another new development. "Well, you've made impressive progress. Maybe a challenge is what we both need." Doc glanced at his weather monitoring equipment. Perfect conditions. Clear skies, light easterly breeze, minimal chance of precipitation. No excuses there. By early evening, Doc found himself doing something he hadn't done in 5 years, walking into town for a community event. He'd fashioned a special harness for Kaiser, padded to prevent chafing but designed to provide support if his leg tired. A small red, white, and blue bandana around Kaiser's neck completed the patriotic transformation. "Dr. Howard?" The harbor master did a double-take as they approached the town square. "Is that really you?" "Evening, Jim," Doc replied awkwardly. "Nice weather for the celebration." "It certainly is," Jim agreed, staring openly at Kaiser. "And who's this handsome fellow?" "This is Kaiser," Doc said with unmistakable pride. "Former Boston PD K-9 unit." Kaiser stood at perfect attention, eyes scanning the crowd with professional interest. "Well, I'll be—" Jim whistled low. "Heard you'd rescued some dog, but didn't believe it. You've been a one-man show for so long." Doc shrugged uncomfortably. Things change. As they made their way through the crowd, Doc was acutely aware of the stares and whispers. He'd become something of a local legend, the brilliant meteorologist who'd withdrawn from the world, appearing only to buy groceries or visit the library. Now here he was, accompanied by a police dog, nodding hello to townspeople he'd previously avoided. The town square had been transformed with strings of lights, banners, and food stalls. A band played patriotic tunes on a small stage while children ran with sparklers under watchful parental eyes. "Dr. Howard, what a lovely surprise." Doc turned to find Eleanor approaching, accompanied by a woman he didn't recognize. "I was just telling my sister about you and Kaiser," Eleanor beamed. "Margaret, this is the man I told you about. The miracle worker who's rehabilitated our most challenging rescue." Margaret, a plump woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands, smiled warmly. "Eleanor's told me everything. I run the bakery on Harbor Street. It's an honor to meet you both." "Kaiser deserves the credit," Doc said, unaccustomed to praise. "He's done all the hard work." "Nonsense," Margaret insisted. "Eleanor showed me the videos of your therapy sessions. You've designed an entire rehabilitation program from scratch. It's remarkable. Doc felt heat rising to his face. It's just applied physics and biology. And heart, Margaret added softly. That's not something that can be designed. The conversation was interrupted by the mayor's announcement that fireworks would begin in 20 minutes. Doc tensed, suddenly concerned about Kaiser's reaction to the explosions. Kaiser might not do well with the fireworks, he explained to Margaret. Given his background in police work, loud noises might trigger. Say no more, Margaret interrupted. My late husband was a Vietnam veteran. Fireworks were difficult for him too. Why don't you both come to my bakery? It's just behind the square. You can watch from the second-floor balcony, enough distance to dampen the sound, but you'll still see the display. Doc hesitated, then looked down at Kaiser, who seemed to sense his indecision. That's very kind, Doc finally replied. We'd appreciate that. Margaret's bakery smelled of vanilla and cinnamon. She led them upstairs to a small apartment and out onto a wrought-iron balcony overlooking the harbor. Below, the crowd had gathered along the waterfront. Let me bring you some refreshments, Margaret insisted, disappearing briefly before returning with a tray of still-warm cookies and lemonade. And something special for your partner. She placed a homemade dog biscuit in front of Kaiser, who looked to Doc for permission before accepting it with gentlemanly restraint. He has beautiful manners, Margaret observed. Military trained, Doc explained. He served his country, in his way. Like James, my husband, Margaret nodded. There's a dignity to those who've sacrificed, isn't there? Human or animal. As the first fireworks exploded over the harbor, Kaiser tensed. Doc immediately placed a calming hand on his back. It's okay, he murmured. We're safe here. To Doc's surprise, Kaiser relaxed under his touch, watching the pyrotechnic display with cautious interest rather than fear. Look at that, Margaret whispered to Doc. He trusts you completely. Doc swallowed past a sudden tightness in his throat. The feeling is mutual. August brought scorching temperatures to Bayview. The beaches filled with tourists escaping Boston's concrete heat, while locals sought refuge in air-conditioned cafes. Doc and Kaiser maintained their routine regardless of weather. Morning exercises, midday research, and evening walks along the less populated northern stretch of beach. One unusually humid Tuesday, Doc was adjusting his barometers when a rental car pulled into his driveway. Kaiser immediately went on alert, positioning himself between Doc and the potential intruder. Easy, Doc murmured. Let's see who it is. A young woman emerged from the car, squinting against the sun as she approached the house. She carried a laptop bag and a stack of papers, her professional appearance at odds with Doc's isolated residence. Dr. Michael Howard? She called tentatively. I'm Olivia Chun from MIT's Department of Earth, Atmospheric, and Planetary Sciences. Doc frowned. I don't take visitors. If the university sent you, they didn't, she interrupted quickly. At least, not officially. I'm here on my own. I'm researching coastal microclimates for my doctoral thesis, and, well, I've read all your published work on atmospheric boundary layers. Kaiser moved forward slightly, assessing the visitor. Olivia noticed him and paused. Is he friendly? She asked. He's professional, Doc replied cryptically. Why are you really here, Miss Chun? Olivia took a deep breath. Your algorithm for detecting precyclonic formations is revolutionary, but incomplete. The paper you published before your departure from NOAA ends with a theoretical framework that was never fully developed. I think I've found a way to complete it. Doc's expression hardened. That work is nearly 6 years old, but still ahead of its time, Olivia insisted. With current computing power and the data sets we now have available, your theories could transform early warning systems. You were right, Dr. Howard. You were just too early. Kaiser, apparently having completed his assessment, returned to Doc's side but remained watchful. I don't do interviews, Doc said firmly. And I don't collaborate. I'm not asking for either, Olivia countered, undeterred. Just 15 minutes to show you what I've done with your framework. Then I'll leave if you want. Doc hesitated, then glanced down at Kaiser, who seemed unusually calm in the presence of the stranger. 15 minutes, he conceded, stepping aside to let her enter. Inside, Olivia's eyes widened at the sophisticated equipment filling Doc's living space. This is amazing, she breathed. You have better monitoring systems than our department. I've had time to tinker, Doc said dryly. Now, what's this about my algorithm? Olivia quickly set up her laptop, pulling up complex mathematical models. Here's where your published work ended, with the theoretical relationship between barometric fluctuations and tropospheric instability patterns. Doc leaned closer despite himself. You've extended the fractal patterns to account for coastal interactions. Yes, Olivia confirmed excitedly, and incorporated sea surface temperature anomalies as a variable rather than a constant. But I'm stuck on the temporal scaling factors. The model breaks down beyond 72 hours. For the next hour, well beyond the promised 15 minutes, Doc found himself engaged in the first meaningful scientific discussion he'd had in years. Kaiser settled nearby, watching the interaction with curious eyes. Your approach is innovative, Doc finally admitted. But you're assuming linear progression in the boundary layer transitions. That's why your model fails beyond 3 days. Olivia's face fell. So it's useless? I didn't say that, Doc replied, reaching for a notepad. What if we introduced a cascading variable to account for the nonlinear behavior? He quickly sketched an equation, then another. Olivia watched intently, occasionally asking questions or suggesting modifications. Kaiser observed them both, his head tilted as if trying to understand their animated exchange. This could work, Olivia said finally, incorporating Doc's suggestions into her model. But I'd need months to validate it against historical data. Doc glanced at his wall of monitors. I might have something that could help with that. He hesitated, then added, and I have coffee, if you'd like to continue this discussion. Olivia smiled brilliantly. I'd like that very much, Dr. Howard. Michael, he corrected. Or Doc, as the locals call me. As Doc prepared coffee, Olivia knelt to Kaiser's level. He's beautiful. What's his name? Kaiser, Doc answered. Former police K9. We're rehabilitation partners. He seems very devoted to you. Olivia observed as Kaiser maintained his protective position near document. We've been through some storms together, Doc replied, the phrase carrying more meaning than Olivia could know. By evening, Doc found himself doing something unprecedented, inviting Olivia to return the following day to continue their work. As her rental car disappeared down the driveway, Doc looked at Kaiser. What do you think? Did I make a mistake? He asked. Kaiser gave a soft whine that Doc had come to interpret as encouragement. Yeah, I think you're right, Doc admitted. Maybe it's time to stop hiding. That night, Doc pulled out research journals he hadn't touched in years, reading late into the night while Kaiser slept peacefully beside his chair, both of them preparing, in their own ways, for a new chapter neither had anticipated. The days grew shorter as September arrived in Bayview. Morning fog rolled in from the Atlantic, wrapping Doc's house in a ghostly embrace until midday sun burned it away. 3 weeks had passed since Olivia's first visit, and she'd become a regular fixture at the Coastal Laboratory, arriving each Tuesday and Thursday to collaborate on their expanding weather prediction model. Kaiser had developed an unusual habit that Doc couldn't help but notice. Each morning before sunrise, the dog would pace by the eastern windows, watching the horizon with unusual intensity. Initially, Doc dismissed it as typical canine behavior, but a pattern emerged that piqued his scientific curiosity. There he goes again, Doc remarked to Olivia as she arrived one Thursday morning. Kaiser stood rigid at the window, ears forward, nose twitching. He's been doing this for 10 days straight. Always starts about 40 minutes before barometric pressure begins to drop. Olivia set down her laptop bag, intrigued. Before it drops? Are you sure? Positive, Doc confirmed. I've been tracking it. He handed her a notebook filled with precise observations, times, behaviors, and corresponding atmospheric readings. Look at the correlation. It's remarkable. Dogs have highly sensitive ears, Olivia mused, reviewing his notes. They can detect sounds well below human hearing range. Maybe he's picking up on infrasonic waves generated by weather fronts. Kaiser turned from the window, fixing them with a penetrating gaze before returning to his vigilance. It's more than that, Doc insisted. He shows different behaviors for different weather patterns. This agitated pacing, it precedes rapid pressure drops, the kind associated with approaching storm fronts. When it's just normal daily fluctuations, he just sits and watches. You've gotten quite attached to him, Olivia observed with a smile. He's become a research partner, Doc replied, slightly defensive. His sensitivity to atmospheric changes is extraordinary. I think we should document it formally. A scientific paper on canine meteorological prediction? Olivia raised an eyebrow. That's quite a departure from algorithm development. Science is about observation, not preconception, Doc countered. Something I'd forgotten until recently. For the next hour, they worked side by side, Olivia refining their mathematical model while Doc compiled his observations of Kaiser's behavior. The dog eventually abandoned his post by the window and settled between them, occasionally glancing up as if following their conversation. He understands more than we think, Doc said quietly. Sometimes I swear he's listening to our technical discussions. Animals are perceptive, Olivia agreed. But there's something special about Kaiser. Has he always been this attuned to weather patterns? Not that I noticed initially. It developed as he recovered physically. Doc thoughtfully stroked Kaiser's head. Perhaps as his pain diminished, his awareness expanded. Their work was interrupted by Doc's emergency radio crackling to life. "Attention all coastal residents," came the harbor master's voice. "Weather Service has issued a small craft advisory for this afternoon. Unexpected squall developing offshore. All vessels should return to harbor immediately." Doc frowned, checking his instruments. "That's odd. There's nothing on the radar." Kaiser suddenly stood, returning to the window with renewed intensity. "What is it, boy?" Doc asked, joining him. The horizon looked clear, with only a few scattered clouds. "Could the advisory be premature?" Olivia suggested. "Or our furry friend knows something the Weather Service doesn't." Doc replied, watching Kaiser's rigid posture. "Look at him. He's been showing warning signs for hours. The instruments are just now starting to catch up." Doc made a quick decision. "Call the harbor master. Tell him it's worse than they think. This isn't just a squall. These readings suggest a microburst situation developing." "He won't listen to me," Olivia protested. "I'm just a graduate student. Tell him it's from me," Doc instructed. "He knows my background." While Olivia made the call, Doc studied Kaiser intently. "What exactly are you sensing, boy? What are we missing?" Kaiser's amber eyes met Doc's, communicating something beyond words, an ancient connection between human and canine, predating technology and science. The harbor master was skeptical but respected Doc's reputation enough to upgrade the warning. By early afternoon, dark clouds rapidly formed where clear skies had been, confirming Kaiser's prediction hours before meteorological equipment detected the threat. As fierce winds and stinging rain battered the coastline, Doc watched the storm from his reinforced windows, one hand resting on Kaiser's back. "You knew," he whispered. "Somehow you knew." Kaiser pressed against Doc's leg, as if to say, "Of course I did. I've always known when storms are coming. You just needed to learn how to listen." Later, as the storm subsided, Doc made a new entry in his journal. "Today marks the beginning of the Kaiser Protocol, a multi-species approach to early storm detection. My unexpected partner may have just revolutionized predictive meteorology." October in New England painted the coastline with fiery colors, but Doc had little time to appreciate the scenery. Word had spread through Bayview about Kaiser's remarkable prediction of the September microburst, a storm that had caused minimal damage thanks to the enhanced warnings. What began as local curiosity had evolved into something more significant. "You have another email from the National Weather Service," Olivia announced, scrolling through Doc's inbox. It was Saturday morning, and she had begun dropping by on weekends as their work intensified. "They're requesting your methodology again." Doc glanced up from where he was calibrating a new sensor array. "Tell them the same thing we told them last time. The research is ongoing." Kaiser lay nearby on his specially designed orthopedic bed, eyes tracking Doc's movements with unwavering attention. His rehabilitation had progressed so well that only experts would notice the slight asymmetry in his gait. "They're not going to stop asking," Olivia pointed out. "Neither is MIT, NOAA, or the 3 other research institutes that have contacted us. You predicted a severe weather event that wasn't on any conventional radar. People want to know how." Doc's expression hardened. "They want to know if I've redeemed myself. If the man who failed 6 years ago has found a way back. Is that so terrible?" Olivia asked gently. "You were right this time. 7 fishing vessels made it back to harbor because of your warning. That matters." Kaiser suddenly stood, ears alert, body tense. Both Doc and Olivia immediately turned to their instruments. "Pressure stable," Olivia noted, checking the readings. "Temperature normal, humidity at 62%. Check the offshore buoy data," Doc instructed, watching Kaiser's behavior intently. The dog was now pacing in a specific pattern Doc had come to recognize. 3 steps, Pause. Alert posture. Repeat. Olivia quickly pulled up the data feed. That's strange. Buoy 9 is reporting unusual wave patterns, not consistent with local wind conditions. Seismic activity? Doc suggested. Nothing reported, but wait. Olivia leaned closer to her screen. There was a small submarine landslide detected off Nova Scotia early this morning. Too small for tsunami warnings, but potentially enough to create anomalous wave patterns that traditional weather models wouldn't account for. Doc finished, his scientific mind racing. Kaiser's detecting something our instruments can't quantify yet. As if confirming this assessment, Kaiser approached Doc, nudging his hand insistently before returning to his pacing. I think we need to alert the harbor master again, Doc decided, reaching for his phone. Tell him to advise against offshore travel for the next 24 hours. Based on what? Olivia asked. Kaiser's behavior? The harbor master respected your reputation with the microburst, but this is different. We have almost no instrumental confirmation. Doc looked down at Kaiser, then back at Olivia. Sometimes you have to trust what you can't yet explain, he said quietly. That's how science evolves. The harbor master was indeed skeptical, but Doc's recent success earned him enough credibility for a cautionary bulletin to be issued. When unusual rogue waves battered the coastline 18 hours later, waves that conventional models had completely missed, Kaiser's reputation was cemented alongside Doc's renewed standing in the scientific community. Later that evening, as Doc analyzed data from the event, a local news van pulled into his driveway. Kaiser immediately went on alert. They've been calling for days, Olivia said, peering through the blinds. Channel 5 News from Boston. They want to do a story on the weather dog and the reclusive scientist. Doc grimaced. Tell them we're not interested. Michael, Olivia said, using his first name, something she'd begun doing only recently. This could be important for our research. Public interest means potential funding. Kaiser moved to the door, his posture protective rather than welcoming. Kaiser agrees with me, Doc noted with a hint of smugness. At least let me talk to them, Olivia suggested. I can share some of our preliminary findings without compromising the full research. Doc hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Basic information only, and keep my personal history out of it. While Olivia spoke with the reporters outside, Doc knelt beside Kaiser. Not fond of cameras, huh? Neither am I. Too many painful memories associated with them. Kaiser leaned slightly against Doc's leg, a gesture of solidarity that had become their private language. I never told you about the press conference after Hurricane Eliza. Doc continued, his voice low. Cameras everywhere. Reporters shouting questions about how I could have been so wrong. Why people died because of my miscalculation. He swallowed hard. I couldn't answer them. Not then. Kaiser's amber eyes fixed on Doc with an intensity that sometimes made Doc wonder exactly how much the dog understood. But maybe now, Doc whispered. Maybe with what we're learning together, I can finally make amends. When Olivia returned, she was beaming. They're going to run a short segment on Kaiser's unique abilities. I positioned it as breakthrough research in multi-species environmental monitoring. Very scientific, very respectable. Thank you, Doc said sincerely, for understanding why this is difficult for me. Partners understand each other, Olivia replied simply, returning to her data analysis. Doc watched her work for a moment, then glanced at Kaiser, who had settled between them, completing their unlikely research team. For the first time in years, Doc allowed himself to consider the future without dread, a future where past mistakes might finally be balanced by new discoveries, and where isolation had given way to unexpected connection. November brought early frosts to Bayview, coating the weathered cedar shingles of Doc's house with a crystalline sheen each morning. The increased attention on Kaiser's predictive abilities had transformed Doc's carefully guarded solitude into something altogether different. His research with Olivia had gained traction in scientific circles, and a preliminary paper titled Canine Sensitivity to Pre-Manifestation Atmospheric Anomalies was under peer review at a prestigious meteorological journal. Kaiser, now fully recovered from his physical injuries, had developed a commanding presence. His once dull coat gleamed with health, and his amber eyes conveyed an intelligence that visitors found both disconcerting and fascinating. You've become something of a celebrity, Doc told Kaiser as they completed their morning walk along the frozen beach. Not bad for a dog nobody wanted at that auction. Kaiser trotted ahead, occasionally stopping to investigate something of interest before returning to Doc's side. Their silent communication had evolved beyond what Doc could have imagined, each understanding the other's signals with remarkable precision. As they approached the house, Doc noticed an unfamiliar car parked in the driveway beside Olivia's familiar compact. Kaiser immediately tensed, moving protectively in front of Document. "It's okay," Doc assured him, though his own apprehension spiked. Unexpected visitors rarely brought good news. Inside, they found Olivia in conversation with an older woman dressed in practical outdoor clothing. Both looked up as Doc and Kaiser entered. "Doc, this is Meredith Simmons," Olivia said, her expression unreadable. "She's from the Bayview Rescue Center." The woman stood, her eyes fixed not on Doc, but on Kaiser. "I volunteered at the center for 15 years, she explained. "I was there the day you adopted him." Kaiser moved closer to Doc, pressing against his leg in a gesture that had become their mutual reassurance. "What brings you here, Miss Simmons?" Doc asked, removing his gloves but remaining by the door. "Recognition," she replied simply. "When I saw the news segment about the weather dog, I couldn't believe it. I kept thinking, that can't be the same broken-down K9 from the auction. But it is him, isn't it?" Doc nodded cautiously. "Kaiser has made a remarkable recovery." "More than remarkable," Meredith said, emotion creeping into her voice. "It's miraculous. But that's not why I'm here." She reached into her bag and withdrew a folder. "I thought you should have this. It's Kaiser's complete file, not just the sanitized version the police department released to the shelter." Doc accepted the folder with a frown. "I have his medical records already." "This is more than medical," Meredith explained. "It's his full service history, including classified operations. I obtained it through unofficial channels. Former K9 handlers who weren't happy with how Kaiser was discarded." Doc opened the folder, scanning the first page. His face paled. "This says Kaiser belonged to Dr. David Miller, a meteorologist with the NOAA Hurricane Center." "Not just any meteorologist," Meredith said quietly. "Your former colleague." The room fell silent as the implication hung in the air. Doc looked from the document to Kaiser, whose steady gaze seemed to hold a deeper meaning. "David and Kaiser were a special operations team," Meredith continued. "They were deployed to natural disaster zones, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, for rescue operations and scientific data collection. David trained Kaiser to detect atmospheric changes that preceded severe weather events. The dog could sense things our instruments couldn't." Doc sank into a chair, the folder trembling in his hands. "David Miller died during Hurricane Eliza," he whispered. "The hurricane I failed to predict correctly." "Yes," Meredith confirmed. "He and Kaiser were conducting last-minute evacuations in the coastal zone that you had declared safe. When the hurricane changed course, they were caught in the storm surge. David didn't make it out. Kaiser was found 2 days later, injured but alive, still guarding the spot where he'd last seen his handler." Doc looked at Kaiser with new understanding. "No wonder you were so traumatized. You lost your partner because of my mistake." Kaiser moved forward, placing his head on Doc's knee, a gesture of forgiveness that broke something open inside the scientist. "I never knew," Doc said, his voice breaking. "All this time, I never knew the connection." Olivia, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. "Do you think it's coincidence that Kaiser ended up with you? Of all the people at that auction." "There are no coincidences in science," Doc replied softly. "Only variables we haven't accounted for." He gently stroked Kaiser's head. "You knew all along, didn't you? You recognized my voice from the Hurricane Center. You knew who I was." Kaiser's eyes remained fixed on Doc, reflecting a depth of understanding that transcended their species' difference. "David used to say Kaiser could predict storms better than any computer model," Meredith added. "He was developing a methodology to integrate Kaiser's sensitivity into official forecasting systems when my error cost him his life." Doc finished, the weight of responsibility settling anew on his shoulders. "Or when fate put in motion the events that would eventually bring his work to completion through you," Olivia suggested gently. "Perhaps Kaiser found exactly who he needed to fulfill David's vision, and perhaps you found exactly who you needed to find your way back." Doc wiped moisture from his eyes. "The Kaiser Protocol," he murmured. "That's what we've been developing all along. David's unfinished work." As evening shadows lengthened across the room, Doc sat with Kaiser beside him. reading through the complete history of the dog who had unexpectedly become the bridge between his darkest failure and the possibility of redemption. In the gentle pressure of Kaiser's body against his leg, Doc felt something he had denied himself for 6 long years: forgiveness, and with it, hope. The darkest days of winter settled over Bayview like a heavy blanket. December brought snowstorms that transformed the coastal landscape into a monochrome world of whites and grays. Doc's house stood as a beacon on the bluff, warm lights spilling from windows that no longer remained perpetually shuttered. Inside, Doc sat at his workstation, the wall of monitors displaying complex weather patterns while Olivia reviewed their latest research findings. Kaiser lay nearby on his customized bed, head resting on paws, but eyes alert, watching Doc with unwavering attention. "The peer reviewers are enthusiastic," Olivia announced, looking up from her laptop. "They're calling the Kaiser protocol potentially transformative for early warning systems. They want more data, of course, but the preliminary results are compelling enough for publication." Doc nodded absently, his attention seemingly elsewhere. Since Meredith Simmons' revelation about Kaiser's past a month ago, he had grown increasingly introspective. The knowledge that Kaiser had once belonged to David Miller, a colleague whose death Doc had always carried as a personal burden, had reopened wounds he thought long scarred over. "Michael," Olivia prompted gently, "did you hear what I said? This is good news." "Yes, it is," Doc agreed, turning from the monitors. David would be proud to see his work continuing. Kaiser rose at the mention of his former handler's name, moving to Doc's side with deliberate steps. Doc placed a hand on the dog's head, the gesture now as natural as breathing. "I've been thinking," Doc said, his voice unusually hesitant, "about contacting David's family. His parents are still alive, according to the file. They should know about Kaiser, about what we're doing." Olivia's expression softened. "I think that's a wonderful idea." Their conversation was interrupted by Kaiser's sudden alertness. His ears perked forward, body tensing in the way Doc had learned to recognize as his weather-sensing posture. "What is it, boy?" Doc asked, immediately checking his instruments. "Barometric pressure is stable, no significant changes in any readings." Kaiser moved to the window, pacing anxiously. Doc followed, peering out at the snow-covered landscape. "Nothing visible. What are you sensing?" The dog's behavior intensified, moving from window to window with growing agitation. "I've never seen him this reactive before," Doc said, concern evident in his voice. He returned to his computers, running additional weather analyses. "Wait, there's an unusual pattern forming offshore. Rapid temperature fluctuations at high altitude." Olivia joined him, studying the data. "Could be nothing, but Kaiser doesn't react to nothing," Doc interrupted. "Call the emergency management office. Tell them we're detecting early signs of a potential ice storm, worse than anything in the models." While Olivia made the call, Doc continued analyzing the emerging data. Kaiser remained vigilant, his behavior a crucial component of what they now formally called the Kaiser Protocol, the integration of canine sensitivity with advanced meteorological instrumentation. The warning proved prescient. Within hours, a devastating ice storm descended on the New England coast, coating roads and power lines with lethal thickness. But thanks to the early alert, emergency crews were positioned, and vulnerable residents evacuated before the worst hit. As Bayview plunged into darkness, Doc's generator hummed steadily, keeping the critical monitoring equipment operational. The three of them, man, woman, and dog, worked through the night, providing real-time updates to emergency services. By morning, exhaustion had claimed them all. Olivia dozed on the couch while Doc sat on the floor beside Kaiser, watching the snow continue to fall outside. "You saved lives today," Doc told Kaiser quietly, "just like you did with David." Kaiser's amber eyes met Doc's, holding that mysterious connection that had grown between them. "I need to tell you something," Doc continued, his voice barely audible. "Something I've never told anyone. The day of Hurricane Eliza, I saw anomalies in the data, small inconsistencies that suggested the storm might not turn east as predicted. But I dismissed them. I was so confident in my models, so certain of my expertise, that I ignored the warning signs." Kaiser listened intently, as if understanding every word. "I've carried that guilt for 6 years," Doc admitted. "But working with you, seeing how you trust your instincts even when they contradict conventional wisdom, it's taught me something profound. Science isn't just about models and equations. It's about observation, intuition, the willingness to believe what you're seeing, even when it challenges everything you think you know. Doc ran a hand along Kaiser's scarred flank. You and David understood that. And somehow, through some cosmic twist I'll never fully comprehend, you found your way to me, to teach me what I'd forgotten. Kaiser rested his head on Doc's knee, a gesture of acceptance and forgiveness that brought unexpected tears to the scientist's eyes. We have work to do, you and I, Doc whispered. David's work. Our work now. As dawn broke over the ice-encrusted coastline, Doc made a decision. With Kaiser by his side, he would step back into the world he'd abandoned, not as the infallible storm whisperer of his past, but as a humbled scientist with a remarkable canine partner and a new understanding of how knowledge truly advances. 3 days later, when power was restored to Bayview, Doc sat down at his computer and composed an email to David Miller's parents. He attached photos of Kaiser, healthy, strong, purposeful, and explained the extraordinary journey that had brought David's dog into his life. He told them about the Kaiser protocol and how their son's innovative work with canine storm detection was finally being recognized by the scientific community. In the final paragraph, Doc wrote words that had been forming in his heart for months. I cannot change the past or undo the mistakes that cost your son his life. But through Kaiser, David's vision lives on. Together, we are building a legacy that honors his memory and protects others from similar tragedy. In Kaiser, I have found not just a research partner, but redemption. And perhaps, if you're willing, a bridge to connect David's family with the future he imagined but didn't live to see. As he sent the message, Doc felt Kaiser's warm presence against his leg, steady, loyal, and somehow knowing. Outside, the winter sun broke through clouds, casting golden light across the snow-covered landscape. For the first time in years, Doc Howard opened his front door wide and stood in that light, Kaiser beside him, both of them looking not backward at what was lost, but forward to what might yet be found. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and if you watched until here, comment, I watched until here, and share your opinion about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the end screen. It's very exciting.